grief. So something that we all have gone through and all will go through at some point in our lives. Grief is usually thought of as a death, but it can also be the loss of anything significant. So a breakup or a divorce, these things can lead to grief also. And I wanted to start with a quote from my grandfather who said that, you can't tell someone who to love or how to grieve. So grief is a very personal thing, obviously, and everybody does it slightly differently. But we're going to look at the what are known as the stages of grief, and they've evolved over the years. But you can go to the next slide. But we'll look at those. And as I go through them, what I'd like you guys to do is think about a loss in your life that you've had to go through, the loss of a loved one dying, or even an animal or a breakup, and sort of compare your experience with these classic stages of grief. So why don't you go to the next slide? So these are the stages. They're mostly shock, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance are sort of the classic ones that you see in pop culture. And then they've gotten a little bit more nuanced over the years by adding things like pain and guilt, anger, an upward turn, and reconstruction. So we go to the next slide. So shock and denial. This is something that most people, especially if it's a sudden loss, it's very, very normal and protective and almost healthy protective and healthy to just block it out. It's just too much to absorb. So I had a friend who worked in the ER, and I'm sure you guys have seen this. They go and they say, I'm sorry, your husband, we did everything we could and he died. They're trained to say he died. And the family says, oh, okay, can he come with us now? We need to get to the grocery store. They're like, no, he's dead. And they just don't get it. So they have to keep him there till they're past that real denial and shock. And it's protective. Okay, next slide. Then pain and guilt, which is, now this is the pain, the acute pain, that this is the second stage of grief. So it's like it's not like a real pain, it is a real pain. It's like a punch in your chest or someone crushing you. It's physical. It's not just emotional, not that you can separate the two, but it's a real pain, and pain receptors in your brain light up, the whole thing. And this is a pain that you kind of have to go through. It's just part of the separation and the reorganizing your life. But often people use alcohol or drugs to dampen this pain because it's so severe. And that can lead to more problems. And guilt can start coming in at this point. Well, it's my fault. And everybody feels that at some degree. And for others, depending on how the death happened, maybe you were driving and the passenger died and you feel lots and lots of guilt. And other times there's absolutely nothing you could have done, but you still may feel some guilt. And at this point, things are scary and chaotic. So then the next stage is anger and bargaining. Bargaining is the classic with death, your own death. So you bargain. That's how these stages were first developed, about watching people die in hospitals. And so bargaining is a common theme, like, oh, if I just eat right, or if I just pray, or if I just go to church, God, will you let me live longer? Or if it's a relationship, well, I'll just be nicer to her or him, and then we'll get back together. This is that sort of bargaining, even though it's often irrational. And then there's also the anger that goes along with bargaining. Why did this happen to me? And then you can displace that anger onto anybody in your path. It could be people trying to help you. It could be the person who's died. Anger can go almost anywhere. Okay, next slide. Then we get into depression, reflection, loneliness. So this is what a lot of people think of as grief. I'm sad, I want to be alone, leave me alone. And it's also usually the longest phase. And these phases come in waves. That's why I had the big picture of a wave in the beginning. And there's a wave picture, if you can see it in the background of this, because all these kind of things come in waves. You could be feeling good for a day or half a day, and then all of a sudden you get a reminder and bam, you're just under the water, treading water, barely able to survive. And then you pop up and you take a breath, and then life seems a little bit better. And the waves are big and brutal in the beginning and chaotic. but then they just come sort of slowly and you get depressed and you understand what's been happening and that this is irreversible. Okay, next. Then hopefully for almost all people, at some point there's an upward turn. You start to, the confusion and the pummeling of the waves starts to subside a little. You can come up for air at longer periods. The intensity of the depression is lessened. You're sort of floating on the waves as opposed to getting crushed by them all the time. Okay, next. And then there's working through. This is where you start to come back towards normal. You start to reconstruct your life. Okay, this love object is gone. They're not coming back. A big chunk of me is just gone. And now I have to reconstruct my life around that loss and make sense of it and get through my day. Okay, next. And then acceptance. So you accept the loss. This is not jump up, click your heels, everything's wonderful. This is a new normal. This is finding a new way forward. You found your new way forward. So you had that breakup, you had that death, and now you're looking ahead as opposed to looking backwards or just trying to tread water. Your life is at the new normal. Okay, next. Some other common reactions are confusion, preoccupation, a sense of the deceased presence. This happened to me and to my mom, who I'm visiting her. When her husband of 50 years, my dad, died, she still feels him, like as if he's in the other room. And that's normal, and for her, very protective and healthy. And she knows he's not really there. Hallucinations, especially in the beginning, are very common. Feeling numb is more common in the beginning of the process. Next. The one I want to look at here is the feeling of emancipation. This happens more with people who have had a long, protracted death, and then once the person's gone, there is a sense of relief, and that can especially happen with people with Alzheimer's and things like that. Okay, you can go to the next slide. And then I wanted to do a couple slides on anger here. So anger is a very common emotion in grief, although sometimes overlooked. And it comes in two major forms. First, you're frustrated that you couldn't prevent the death. What did I do wrong? And so it's you get angry at yourself, you get angry at other people who you think should have done something differently. And then anger is also a normal regressive way to protect yourself. So like little toddlers get angry, and that helps protect them. It helps build the borders and the boundaries around themselves. So that's a normal, healthy thing. And when an adult has a major blow to their psyche, they can regress to protect themselves, and anger helps protect yourself. And you can also get angry at the person who died. How dare you? How you should have taken care of yourself. You should have done this or that. You've abandoned us. And that's also a normal thing too, and can feel really awful. Okay, next. And as I was saying, it's very common to displace anger. So you're angry at the world, you're angry at fate, you're angry at yourself, but now you're spending all your time suing the EMS or the doctor or whomever. That's a very common thing too. And sometimes it is somebody else's fault, and it can be helpful, but you just gotta know what you're doing. And if anger gets too focused inward, it can become a pretty serious depression when you're angry at yourself. Okay, next. Okay, so how to help. So if someone you know is going through grief, the best thing you can do is just show up and listen. Just sit there and listen and be an ear. And then if you want to do something, ask, how are you feeling? And then you can share your own feelings. I'm really sad. I loved him too. I mean, I know you had a stronger connection, but I'm feeling sad. How are you feeling? Ask about the loss. It's okay to ask about the person. Tell me some memories about your loved one. Tell me about your dad. Tell me about your husband. And then do things. This says make telephone calls, but do stuff. Do something. Don't worry about it. I'll get this. I'll cover that for you. I'll make this phone call. You just sit there in working through the stages of grief and let me handle it. And if they don't want you to, they'll let you know. But if you just say, oh, I'll do anything you want, I'm here for you, and then don't offer concrete help, that's not as helpful. Allow them to feel sad, allow them to go through these stages. And of course, don't sermonize or it's all for the best. This is all part of the plan. That doesn't help anybody really. Okay, next. How do you move forward if you're the one going through grief? It's basically the same thing as any self-care. Exercise, eat. One of the analogies I really like is fly the plane. The FAA says if there's ever a problem and the plane is losing control, the first thing you should do is aviate. You aviate, then you navigate, and then you communicate. So before you start figuring out where you're going or how to communicate to the radio tower, just fly the effing plane. You just take care of your life day to day, moment to moment. Just fly the plane. And then the other thing which I saw from is just ask yourself, if you're going through grief, is this helping or hurting? Is looking through these photos of my loved ones who's dead helping me or hurting me? And sometimes it's helpful. Sometimes it's good to work through that, but you'll know when it's no longer helpful, when it's just keeping you held back. And then the last thing I'd like to say to the group, you can go to the next slide, is, or just turn off the slides. The last thing I want to say is that we're all going to die. That's no secret. And it can happen suddenly. This could be your very last breath you take right now, or it could happen tomorrow, or in a year from now. We all know we're going to die. We just don't know when or how. So with that in mind, it's good to live your life knowing that you're going to die because you live it more fully. And it's also good to make preparations. Like I know I started working on a will and I'm like, I don't fucking work on a will. I have so much other stuff to do, but I got to do it. You just have to do it. You have to face your mortality and you have to make preparations for yourself and for your family. And that's it. Thank you guys.